Now then, Paul Jones, I've been a bad, bad boy on BBC Radio Lancashire this afternoon. Don Busby joins me at 1:30 for the sport. We'll also have round one of Lancashire's brainiest borough as well. But first up, between the 8th and 12th century, the Vikings had pretty much the free run of Europe, trading with some places, raiding and pillaging and settling in others. The Vikings certainly left their mark on the UK. Many place names we know today come in part from the language, and Yorkshire in particular lays claim to Viking origins. They're quite proud of their Viking heritage, but Lancashire has plenty to boast about when it comes to the Vikings. A genetics project a few years ago proved that around half of the DNA of men from Old Wirral and West Lancashire is Norse in origin. Who knew that there were so many Vikings around these days? My first guest this afternoon has been studying the effects the Norsemen had on the Red Rose County. Professor Stephen Harding has published books looking at what the Vikings got up to in Lancashire, and he's appearing with colleagues at Langham Hall in Ormskirk tonight, aiming to put the record straight and lay claim to our own proud heritage. Welcome along, Stephen. A national study a couple of years ago suggested there could be around 1 million men in the UK with Norse roots. Roughly 1 in 33 males have Viking blood in their veins. I mean, looking at your own research, do you think that's a fair estimate?
I think so, and of course it's not evenly distributed. It's there's pockets around the UK. We all hear about Yorkshire, if we're allowed to say that word on the show.
We'll let you.
But also Lancashire as well in the northwest. With Yorkshire and the east, it was more sort of Danish incursions, and we learn about that at school, you know, how the Vikings were sort of baddies in that sense, and how Alfred the Great fought against them. And the Anglo-Saxon chronicles record all the battles taking place between the English and the Danish Vikings. What we don't hear about is the silent incursion of Norwegian Vikings who came down past the Orkney Shetlands, down the Irish Sea, settling in the Isle of Man and in Ireland. And what happened, there was a huge battle in the first part of the 10th century which drove the Vikings out of Ireland. So where do they come? They come to the northwest. And how do we know? Because of all the place names that are in the northwest, which are mainly Norwegian Viking in origin as opposed to Danish Vikings in Yorkshire. So we're equally as important as the Yorkshire lot, but perhaps in a different sort of way.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a bit about yourself and the day job. You're a professor of applied biochemistry. What does that mean? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I'm a scientist, and as you can gather from that name, so my main area is biochemistry. I used to be a physicist many years ago, so sort of general physical biochemical science. But over the last 10-15 years, I've been involved with a lot of the research into Vikings. Now, Viking research is not just the preserve these days of the archaeologists and the linguistics historians, although they are still the lead disciplines. But science is having a big role, in terms of physics, all these great booming metal detectors and the great work that they do, chemistry, work of isotopes and things, and of course biology with genetics. So that's how I've got involved with the science input. And it's great fun.
Yeah. And the very mention, I think, of the word Viking brings to mind burly Scandinavians rampaging through towns and villages, taking what they wanted. I think you'd argue, though, that they weren't just a bunch of violent hooligans, wouldn't you? Why do you think Vikings had such a bad reputation? What did they do to deserve that reputation?
Well, I think it was largely the chroniclers, the Anglo-Saxon chroniclers, which partly propaganda to try and paint this very bleak picture of these people. Although, to be fair, the Anglo-Saxons were equally brutal when they came into the British Isles a few hundred years before. But any population like that had its tough guys, but also its scholars and craftsmen, farmers. I mean, in the northwest, the reason why we don't hear about it in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles is because the incursion was peaceful. And, for example, there's place names like Gunsarg, Grimsarg, Anglesarg. We see Arg, that's an Old Norse name for a type of pasture land. So these guys were farmers. And then you have examples like Newton with Scales, Slime with Hest, combined names. We have an English place name with a Norse place name, indicating a sort of peaceful coexistence. But sure, they could meet violence with violence if they wanted to, but it was generally more peaceful. I think we can say that with some confidence.
You mentioned a few place names there, a few villages. Give us a few more, because people, I think, like to hear about these villages.
Okay, I'll give you one or two. Well,
someone in Newton with Scales now will be thinking, well, that's quite interesting.
Well, Scales comes from Scally, which means a type of settlement, and so Paul Scholes, the former Man United footballer, has a Viking name. But Clitheroe, not far from the studios here. Clitheroe, Clithra, Old Norse name meaning song thrush, and Haug, Og, meaning mound. So the mound with the song thrush. That sounds great, and I'm sure estate agents would agree with me. That sounds like a great place. Yeah. But, Ormskirk, the Church of Orm, Skelmersdale, Skalmersdal, the valley of Skalmar, but also names like Hesketh Bank. Hesketh comes from the Old Norse name Heskethgate, which means horse racetrack. So these guys like to race the horses. Aintree. Aintree is an Old Norse name meaning one tree. So, even sporty Vikings.
I think we're about a fortnight away from the Grand National, aren't we?
Absolutely. So think of Vikings when you think of the Grand National.
When you're putting your 50p each way on.
That's right.
Now and again, we hear about maybe a farmer or someone on a farmer's land digging up a field. Someone's got the metal detector, stumbling across a hoard of Viking coins and treasures. One that springs to mind is the Silverdale hoard, isn't it?
Absolutely fantastic. It's not the only one. There's lots. These days, the metal detector gang are finding lots and lots of things. They do a great job, and working in what's called the Portable Antiquities Scheme with fines liaison officers, many fines are being made, all over the county. But yeah, you point at Silverdale, where I think a few years ago a detectorist, I think it was Darren Webster, came across this lead pot with something like 200 items of treasure, bracelets, ingots, coins in this, and the local fines liaison officer, Dot Borton, couldn't believe her eyes. Eyes popped out of her head when she saw this stuff. But but there's lots of other examples around the county. There's swords, Anglo-Scandinavian swords, been found in Skelmersdale, in Livingston Anns, and a scabbard from a sword found in Gisborne. So yeah, keep an eye out in your back gardens, folks, and you never know what you might come up with.
So if you are a metal detector and you find something, just don't just chuck it away.
Absolutely not. Nor put it in, nor hide it away. Do sort of notify the local museums liaison officers, and they'll deal with it in a very professional way. You won't get ripped off in any way. It's all done properly.
We'll come back, we'll chat some more after the sport. This one to take us to 1:30. Don Busby with me next, a roundup of the sport, and we'll chat more to Professor Stephen Harding this afternoon. This is The Drifters. Good afternoon. The Beach Boys, God Only Knows, on BBC Radio Lancashire. Brainius Borough, round one, question one. The Silverdale hoard was discovered in a field in Lancashire by a man named Darren Webster. It consists of over 200 pieces of silver jewellery and coins, but in which year did Darren discover it with his metal detector? And in fact, Stephen, discovered in Wharton, and that's a good old Viking name, isn't it?
It is a good old Viking name. War comes from Varth, which means a lookout point. It's also the name of my mum. So my mum's got a Lancashire name. My mum's a Wharton. So although I'm from the other side of the Mersey, I'm afraid, I regard myself as an honorary Lancastrian because of that. Yeah.
And of course, when you were last in, and it's a couple of years ago now, we last chatted, you were doing some DNA tests in West Lancashire and also North Lancashire. Now the West Lancashire ones came through, didn't they? But the North Lancashire ones held up, and I think still still held up.
Yeah, the West Lancs one was published a few years ago now in the book Viking DNA, the Wirral West Lancashire project. So that's been out. The book's just been reprinted last year. But the follow-up was North Lancs, Cumbria and Yorkshire. That was supposed to have finished by now, but unfortunately the team, which is a joint one between Nottingham and Leicester, got held up because there was someone discovered under a car park in a supermarket in Leicester, King Richard III. So the Leicester team been heavily focused on that, I'm afraid. How could they neglect the Lancashire survey? So that's just about coming to an end, all the follow-ups from that. So hopefully we'll be able to wrap up the North Lancs survey quite soon. It's a survey where we use people with old names from the area, so we could get right back behind all the movements that have taken place since the Industrial Revolution. So yeah, we're looking forward to the results of that.
Right. And tonight, of course, you're talking in Ormskirk. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But as we were saying, Darren discovered this, pot of treasure in a field. Let's say I discover the Darwin Street Hoard here, a huge pot of Viking coins right here underneath these studios. What happens? I mean, do I own them? Is it finders keepers?
Well, no. What you're supposed to do is to report it to your local museum or local fines liaison officer through the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and they will inspect the discovery, and you're fully protected. Basically, if they find it's treasure, then although the Crown claims ownership of that you will then receive a fee, and it can be quite a handsome fee. Alternatively, if it's not regarded as treasure, the find is logged. You get the credit for it, and you get the treasure back. So you're fully protected. The key thing is, if you find something of great value, don't start poking about with it. Try and leave it as it is. You see, Darren found this stuff in a lead casket and didn't fiddle with it, and then handed it in because the position of the coins and things in these caskets can be very important. So he was absolutely fantastic. So yeah, you'll be very protected. You'll be ripped off at all.
I mean, could there still be plenty of undiscovered treasure lurking beneath the Lancashire soil at the moment?
Absolutely. We just don't know what's under there. So things are cropping up all the time. Ingots and coins and things. So yeah, if you see something of interest, do report it to your local museum.
And just finally, because I know you've got a train to catch, Ormskirk tonight, just remind us, Langham Hall in Ormskirk, it is a sellout tonight, isn't it?
Yeah, the intention coming in was really to flag it up, but it's sold out. So what we're planning on doing is having similar events throughout the county over the next year or so. So watch this space.
Well, thanks for coming in, and the best of luck tonight, and do keep in touch, in particular when the North Lancashire DNA comes out.
Okay, thanks, Gilly.
Well. Thanks very much indeed. Stephen Harding joining me, Professor Stephen Harding this afternoon on BBC Radio Lancashire. This is Irma Franklin.